All right, are we ready to have one more conversation about truth? You're like, yes, if it's only one more. We've been talking about truth a long time, I know, and today we're going to conclude the conversation specifically focusing on truth. So a few years ago, I was watching a television program, and the host was interviewing someone who had kind of been going through a difficult time, and heard this phrase that really kind of caught me off guard as the host, the interviewer, said to the person being interviewed, "You continue to speak your truth." And I thought, wait a second, that's kind of an interesting way to say that. Speak your truth. I thought, no. There's really just the truth. There's not your truth and my truth and his truth and her truth. Like, there's the truth. And if your truth doesn't correspond with the truth, then it's not any truth at all. There's not your truth, there's not my truth. But when I listened, and it's really important to listen when you hear things that you don't quite agree with, and you're like, okay, what's the broader context? What am I missing here? And here's what I discovered that I was missing. That the broader context in the story is that the person being interviewed, who was encouraged to speak her truth, well, she had accused a very powerful, rich man of assaulting her. And of course, when he was accused, he denied it and said it did not happen. And because he was well-known, rich, and powerful, he was generally believed and she was not believed. And yet she held on to that and said, no, but it really happened. And he said, no, it didn't happen. And folks believed him, did not believe her. She insisted that her truth was not just her truth, but it was the truth, but nobody would believe her. And the interviewer was encouraging her, especially after several other young girls had also come out and said that the same person had also assaulted them. And they then eventually had enough folks when the general public started looking and to say, maybe this guy, regardless of how rich and or powerful he is, maybe his truth is not the truth, and what he claims to be the truth is not truth at all. And this person, who's basically called a liar, really had the truth. That is why in our culture we hear things like, speak your truth, because let's just be honest, as a culture, we're confused about what is the truth. By the way, just because we've discovered that the rich and powerful can't be trusted with everything they say, that does not mean at the same time that just because someone is poor and powerless, that they can be trusted every time as well. And so where we've landed as a culture is some folks saying, you know what, we believe maybe in truth, but we're just so confused about the truth, and everybody's fighting over the truth. Maybe we're just beyond truth. Maybe we should just stop talking about truth and just stop fighting about truth. And let's just say that whether or not there's truth, we don't really know. We could just take a skeptical opinion and just say, since we can't really know for certain what is the truth, let's just not talk about truth at all. But that doesn't really work, does it? That sounds good in theory, but it doesn't really work in real life. The conversation also will sometimes go like this, that the more someone believes in truth, that the harder they start to push it on others, and that there's kind of this belief, especially in philosophical circles, that if someone believes in absolute truth, that just ends up being oppressive. And it kind of makes sense, because if I believe that something is absolutely true, then you're really not allowed to disagree with me without you being absolutely wrong. And so folks would say, the other reason we shouldn't talk about truth and let's just discard truth is because people who believe in truth strongly, it's oppressive, and we don't want oppression. But again, that sounds really good in philosophical circles, but truth is not just a philosophical question. It's not just a philosophical issue. Truth is also really practical, right? Because when we bring up the issue of truth, I regularly hear folks saying, I just don't know what to believe, or here is really the question that really kind of comes down to it. I'm not sure who I can believe. And I think as we think about it, like, here's the big question that most folks are asking, even if you're not kind of philosophically oriented and you get kind of bored with the really deep discussions and all that, but this is the big question folks are asking. Who can be trusted to tell me the truth? When I read the news, watch the news, who can be trusted to tell me the truth? When I scroll through my news feed, who can be trusted to tell me the truth? When I go to the library, go to the bookstore, surfing Amazon, looking for a good book that's going to inspire me, who can be trusted to tell me the truth? That, I believe, is the big question about truth. And related to that, because I do agree that it's an important issue, who can be trusted to not oppress me with the truth? So today, we're concluding our series on beautiful truth. We're looking at the book of John, and what we're discovering in the book of John is that, yes, there are still a couple of chapters that we haven't kind of walked through verse by verse by verse, but that really hasn't been our approach anyways. It's just to study what Jesus says about truth and how John really emphasizes truth. And, well, what we discovered last week is that at the end of Jesus' ministry, and he was with his disciples, and he prayed for them, he had taught them and the world everything he was going to teach them about truth. And now it was time to live it out. And so in John chapter 18, we see that Jesus is arrested. He's tried in a religious kind of a court. He's tried in a criminal kind of a situation. He is crucified. He dies. He's buried. He's resurrected. He shows himself to his disciples. And then at 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus goes back to heaven. And that's kind of how it ends. And there's a lot that goes on there, and it kind of moves through those last chapters pretty quickly. If you've been reading along, I would encourage you this week and next week, work through reading the rest of the book of John. It's really, really inspiring. But we're going to just look at a couple of different episodes today. Here's the first episode. Jesus is on trial in front of Pilate, who is the Roman officer in charge. Okay? And so he goes to Pilate, and Jesus and Pilate, they have a conversation. Pilate pulls him inside, and he speaks with him in private. And, we're going to start off in John chapter 18, starting in verse 33. Here's what we read. So Pilate then went back inside the palace, and he summoned Jesus, and he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And in this private conversation, he really wants to figure out, who's this Jesus guy? What is he all about? What's he trying to do? Why is he on trial? Why do these religious leaders want him put to death? Are you the king of the Jews? Verse 34, "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" Verse 35, "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And Pilate's trying to sort through this thing. And he's like, "They keep telling me that you're a king." And, well, the reality is, I can't handle a king because I'm the one in charge here. And if you think you're a king and you have an army hidden somewhere, you're going to cause problems for me. And so, yes, if you think you're a king and you've got an army somewhere and you're going to fight, I'm going to put this thing down right now. That's Pilate's number one, it's his number one question and concern here. Verse 36, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." He says, "You don't have to worry about an army invasion of my followers, Pilate. That's not the kind of king I am. If I was that kind of king, I wouldn't have let myself be arrested in the first place." You should read that story, Jesus arrested. He's like totally in charge of that whole situation, okay? Verse 37, "So you are a king then," said Pilate. He's trying to sort this out, right? He's like, "So are you a king or not?" And Jesus is like, "I am a king, but not the kind of king you have to be worried about." "So you are a king," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You're saying that I'm a king. In fact," and Jesus changes the subject. And look how Jesus changes the subject here, okay? Pilate wants to talk about politics and power and invasion. And do I have any social unrest to worry about when it comes to getting in trouble with Rome and invasion and all that type of stuff? He just wants to know, are you a king? Are you a ruler? Are you going to mess things up around here? And Jesus is like, "You know what, Pilate? I want to change the conversation. You're asking about a king, but here's really what I'm all about." Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason that I was born, the reason that I came into this world is to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Did you catch that last part? We're going to come back and look at that in just a minute, but just do not miss that last part. Jesus says, really what I came to do is to bring truth. And look at how Pilate responds in verse 38. "What is truth?" Pilate retorted. And with this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for charge against him." And sends him off. Tries to. Why does Pilate respond this way? I've tried to think of like all the different ways. Now, when I read that and I read Pilate saying, what is truth? I'm trying to think of all the different ways that Pilate could respond to that. Maybe he said it like this. He said, what is truth? As if it was like a philosophical question. He wanted to play philosopher and, rub his goatee in a really cool way that makes him look super smart and wants to have a nice philosophical conversation about truth. Not really. He's a political leader. He doesn't have time for philosophical conversations like this. But that's how he could have responded. Or when Jesus said, and he's making this argument, the reason I came is for truth, and everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And I think Pilate comes back and he says, what is truth? And he comes back, I think, with the thinking of political truth, in which he has been a part of a lot of arguments, a lot of debates. A lot of people have come to him, and they've advocated for him to back them, to support them, to do their thing, to throw their enemy in jail, to take their side, because that's kind of how the world of politics works, is we want to know that you're on my side, and you're either for me or against me. If you're not on my side, then we're not going to be friends. And in the realm of politics, let's be honest, truth is often only used to force other people to change. Truth is there when it's convenient, and it is conveniently ignored when it is not. Let's be honest, okay? 99% of the people, and that includes all of us, okay? There's a small sliver. You're probably not in the sliver, okay? 99% of us are really not seeking the truth because we think we already have it. We're just trying to convince everybody else that we're right and they're wrong. I mean, really? When was the last time that you've heard someone just own up to it and say it, right? When have you heard last time somebody make an argument for something, a very passionate argument, and say, but I'm probably wrong. I'm really seeking the truth in that. They don't. We don't. If you have a belief, if you have an opinion, you think you're right. It's the nature of an opinion. And for most of us, it takes a lot to even get us to think that we might be wrong. And the reality is, we hear other people say things like, well, this is my truth. And we're like, I don't like that. There's not my truth, your truth. There's just the truth. But when it's us, we like our truth. And we think that whatever we believe is not just my truth, but the truth. And if we disagree, you and I disagree, well, there can't be two the truths, so of course my side's going to be right. And I think Pilate sees that, and he's dealt with this in politics his whole life. And here's another person advocating for the truth. And he's like, what is truth? I'm not even sure we can figure out the truth. I don't know what the truth is. I just want to get through this day and survive. And so he looks at Jesus, I think, and says, whatever. You don't have an army. You're no threat to me. Leave me alone. He allows Jesus to be beaten. He tries to pacify the religious leaders. That doesn't work because then he discovers really they want Jesus put to death. They can't do that, and they need his stamp of approval. So there's another conversation. Pilate drags Jesus into his palace one more time. Chapter 19, look at verse 8. When Pilate heard this, that the religious leaders wanted Jesus put to death, he was even more afraid. He went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. All through this, Jesus is like, look, I'm fully in charge of this situation. If I don't want to answer your question, I'm not going to answer your question. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said, and then Pilate gets mad, and he begins to leverage his authority. Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you? I have the power to put you to death. And Jesus answered, you would have no power from me if it were not given to you from above. Ooh, how's that for some truth? How's that for speaking truth to power? And here we see this amazing inner strength of Jesus. I like to just imagine him, he's like cool, calm, and collected, fully in charge of himself. Nobody's going to push him around. Nobody's going to get him riled because he knows the truth. He is the truth. We're going to see this in the conversation. And he's just like, I don't have to answer your question because I'm really fully in charge of this whole situation anyways. When I read the story of Pilate, I'm sad Because Pilate totally missed the opportunity when he had the truth standing right in front of him. When Pilate answers the question, asks the question, whether philosophically, truly seeking, or I think politically annoyed, and he's just skeptical, and it's just another person making their argument against him, trying to get him on their side, and he's like, what is truth? I'm not even sure we can figure out what truth is. This whole conversation of truth is for philosophers who have nothing better to do than to, not really engage the real world. What is truth anyways? And the last time that Jesus says the word truth in the Gospel of John is right here, John 18:37. Read it with me, come on. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Instead of listening to Jesus, Pilate retorts back, what is truth? Well, Pilate, Jesus just told you. Say it again, come on, read it again. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And who's me? Jesus. Good. I'm glad you didn't put your name in there. Everyone, although I'm sure you fully believe that everything you believe is the truth because you're in that 99%, as am I. Jesus says, the last time he says the word truth, according to the book of John, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Now, here's what I've been thinking, okay? Came to this really great insight a couple of months ago, starting to prepare for this whole series. The accusation is that truth is oppressive and absolute truth is oppressive to people. And what I discover is when Jesus treats people, I've yet to find Jesus oppressing someone. I see Jesus interacting with the rich and the poor, and he treats them with justice and never oppresses. He works with the powerful and the powerless, and he never takes advantage of anyone. And so if there was ever anyone who believed in truth and yet never oppressed, it was Jesus Christ. And in fact, what we discover is that Jesus not only believed in truth, Jesus believed in absolute truth. You don't say things like this unless you have a firm belief in truth. You don't say things like, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. That's not like a my truth, your truth. Everybody just kind of believe whatever truth they want to believe and it's all cool. No, Jesus is like, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And if you're not listening to me, you're not on the side of truth. That is a very absolute statement. That is a very exclusivist statement. And yet Jesus never oppresses anyone while he holds to this radical, extreme view of truth. In fact, what we discover is, if you've been reading, is the religious leaders, they tried to use their power to sacrifice someone else. They said things like, hey, if it keeps the peace, it's worth it if we have to kill one person. If one person dies to keep the peace around here, that'll be okay. They are willing to take Jesus out just to keep the peace. Jesus used his power to self-sacrifice. Jesus oppressed no one. And yet he firmly believed and promoted absolute truth. And Jesus, therefore, becomes our model for understanding truth and for how we talk about the truth. And here's the conclusion I've come to. As I read Jesus, as John talks about truth and Jesus talks about truth, here's the conclusion I've come to. If you know Jesus, you know the truth. Know Jesus? No truth. I mean, you can have some truth without Jesus. But capital T, big picture, the truth, no Jesus, no truth. And Jesus said it himself, at least twice, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. From the mouth of Jesus himself, the most loving, caring, non-oppressive person who ever lived. No Jesus, no truth. No Jesus, no truth. And so, at its core, I've said this like 1,000 times over the last several months, but I really want you to get this. At its core, truth is not an idea, it is a person. At the core, truth is not a series of propositional statements, it is a person. At its core, truth is not a philosophical question, it is a person. And his name is Jesus Christ. And that person is who you can trust. Therefore, Jesus becomes the measuring stick by which you evaluate other truth. Jesus becomes the measuring stick by which you evaluate every truth claim. Someone asked me earlier on in this practice, in the really practical question, like, who can I trust? Who can I trust to tell me the truth? And how do I evaluate someone if they can be trusted? And here's the question. If Jesus is the truth, then you just ask, does this person measure up to Jesus? Does what they are saying and teaching measure up to Jesus? Does it agree with Jesus? And does this person who claims to have the truth think and act and live like Jesus would live if he were living in 2021? The truth is a person. His name is Jesus, and that person is who you can trust. The next thing I've discovered is that Jesus is simple enough for a child to understand him and complex enough for a philosopher to be baffled by him. And so, yes, Jesus is simple. And at a young age, kids can understand him. But please do not settle for a kindergarten view of Jesus. Jesus is so complex, and he said so many things. There's things that after decades of following him, I still cannot figure out. And I'm still praying and seeking and saying, Jesus, teach me, because I don't understand that. Jesus is so complex, and the truth is complex because Jesus is complex. And yes, the truth is simple so a child can understand him, so we teach our kids. But don't stop learning. Don't stop pursuing the truth. Because yes, we see that the truth is complex because Jesus is complex, right? That he says, like, he loves everyone, but he's never a pushover. That he teaches personal responsibility and owning up to what you've done, but he also has incredible mercy and grace, and somehow he blends the two like seamlessly. Never stop learning about Jesus. Never stop seeking Jesus, because no matter how old you are or how long you've been following Jesus, there's more truth for you to learn and to grow into and to activate in your life, because Jesus is complex enough for you for a whole lifetime of learning and growth. Because here's what we know. Truth affects your beliefs, yes, but it affects your values. It affects the choices you make every day. It affects how you see yourself in the mirror and how you see the people around you and how you view the world around you, how you evaluate every news headline that comes your way. Jesus affects the truth that affects every part of your life. And so I've got to seek the truth, seek the truth, seek the truth. And at the same time, understand that we are in the middle of a cultural, worldwide battle for truth. Everybody's battling and advocating that their truth is the truth. Even if they claim to not believe in truth, they still make truth claims that you really should believe, or so they think. But think about how the battle is often fought. And guys, we really got to get a hold of this, right? Philosophers and educators, they fight the battle for truth on the battlefield of the mind. Politicians fight the battle on the battlefield of our hands and feet. In other words, it's all about action. But Jesus fights the battle for truth on the battlefield of the human heart. And yeah, that includes the mind, and it includes what we do, but at its very core, it's a battle for our heart, the center of our being that drives everything we do. Now think about this, okay? If philosophers and educators fight the battle on the battlefield of the mind, then their tools and their weapons are to debate in order to convince you, are to argue in order to get you to change your mind, because the battlefield is on the mind. If politicians fight the battle on the battlefield of hands and feet, it's action, then their tools, their weapons, is going to be legislation in order to force you to do what you don't really want to do, to pass laws, to force you to do what you don't really want to do voluntarily, and so we're going to make you do it. Jesus fights the battle on the battlefield of the human heart. Therefore, his tool, his weapon is to love in order to woo us to follow him and trust him and surrender our lives to him. And to do that, Jesus sacrificed his life to show you and me that he can be trusted. And he doesn't force us. And yes, I believe that it's important to engage our minds and have appropriate debate and argument. And yes, I believe that policy is important and laws are important. But at the end of the day, debate and policy aren't really going to make lasting change. Lasting change comes when there is heart change. And laws and education will never do that. Because when you believe Jesus, and when you trust him, and when you surrender to Jesus as the truth, your heart changes. And Jesus starts with heart change and goes from there. All the political, cultural wrangling over the truth, that's trying to change things on a policy level, on a national and state level. Jesus says, I'm going to start on a heart level. And if we can change a bunch of hearts, we'll go from there. Because here's what we discover, and here's what you have lived, and here's what you have seen, and here's what I've experienced in my own life, that changed hearts change families. And that changed families change communities, and changed communities change nations. And it starts in here, and it goes out from there. You know how I know that? Because, seeking truth, John, the follower of Jesus, who wrote all this down for us as he was inspired by the Holy Spirit, at the very end of it, he kind of picks up a little bit of his own story. And as Jesus said, just as I was sent, I'm sending you. Here's what we discover at the very end of the book. And I know we're kind of running late on time. I'm going to try to make this really fast. Okay, John chapter 19, verse 35. Jesus dies. They watch him die. And look what John injects into the story. Verse 35 here, we find it here. The man who saw it, in other words, he's describing himself because he was there. And so this is John, who's been writing it all down and following Jesus for 3 years, okay? The man who saw, he never talks about himself in the first person. It's kind of weird, but this is how he does it in John, okay? He's talking about himself here. The man who saw it, has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may believe. He gets to the end here, and he's like, look, I know what I saw, and you can trust me with it. I'll raise my hand, put my hand on the Bible as soon as everybody else finishes writing their parts of it, and testify to the truth. I know what I saw, and what I saw is truth, and I want you to believe it because I know that it's the truth, but it's not really going to change your life until you believe it and trust it and believe him and trust him. I know what I saw. It's all true. I testify. I was there. It's the truth. Please believe it. He continues on in the story. Right after the resurrection, he and the other disciples, they've all seen Jesus alive. John chapter 20, verse 30, he injects it again, and he says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this little short book of the Gospel of John. But these things, they have been written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior of the world, that he is the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name, because he says, I don't want you to just believe the truth in your head. I want it to affect your whole life. I want you to live the life that God has for you. And if you will believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, the truth, it'll change your whole life. I want you to believe. But you got to believe it. And then one more time at the very end of things, the last words. Look at how the book of John ends. Chapter 21, verse 24. This is the disciple who testifies to these things. He's talking about himself here. And he wrote them down. That's me. We know that his testimony is true. My testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. Look, if every one of them were written down, I suppose even the whole world could not have room for the books that would be written. Jesus is so wonderful. But I wrote down the key points here and the key stories, and I want you to believe. And what do we see about John? Because here we see the second generation taking the baton from Jesus. Jesus, who is the truth. And now John wants to help you and I to believe the truth and to trust in the truth. What I see in John is that John doesn't force his readers to believe. John's like, look, you don't have to believe the truth, but it is best and life-changing if you do. But I realize I can't force you. John does not pretend to be Jesus. John does not try to pretend that he is the truth. He just points to the truth, who is Jesus. You and I, we are not Jesus. We are not the truth. We point to the truth, and his name is Jesus. We testify to the truth. We say to the world around us and our friends and family, please believe it, the truth. No. Please believe him who is the truth, because he'll change your lives. So here's what I want to leave you with. This is heavy. If I dropped it on your foot, it would break your toe. What is it? It's a brick. It is a velvet-covered brick that I believe teaches us what it's like for us to live the truth and to be the truth in a world around us, in which we are firm and solid on the inside, that we have a core of beliefs that is set on the truth. And we believe the truth, we've been taught the truth, we're pursuing the truth, and the truth is Jesus, whether you like it or not. The truth is Jesus, whether you believe in him or not. The truth is Jesus, and he is absolute truth. And we're firm about that. That we are firm, solid, rock solid on the inside. But on the outside, we're soft, full of love and compassion and grace. The velvet-covered brick. Bricks can hurt when they're thrown. Bricks can hurt when they're dropped. Some of us, in our conversations about truth and advocating for the truth, I believe have often taken too much of a political and or philosophical stance, and we're just bricks running around, breaking people's toes. We're hurling bricks of truth. It's all hardness and not much love and compassion. On the other hand, some of us, we're just soft everywhere. And there's nothing firm and there's no real truth because we'll cave, we'll compromise, we'll change our story just to please anyone because we think that's what love and grace is all about. What if, as followers of Jesus, our goal, the vision that drives us, is to be the velvet-covered brick in which we are firm on the inside, soft on the outside, solid truth. And we live by the truth and it guides us. Everything we do, everything we say, every decision we make. And as we interact with the world, that shows itself in love and kindness and compassion. Not compromising. We're not beating people up, trying to force them to believe, force them to take our side. So how about you? Bow your heads with me if you would. I want you to ask yourself some difficult questions this morning. Then we're going to wrap it up with a quick prayer and go. Am I really seeking the truth? Prayer number 1. Am I really living by the truth? Or maybe a better question to ask the Lord is, Lord, where in my life am I compromising the truth? I hope by now, after 21 weeks of talking about truth, you've become convinced that this is a big deal. It's really important. Lord, where am I compromising the truth? And now, Lord, in how I handle the truth and talk about the truth and live the truth, does my life draw people to the truth of Jesus? Or am I all brick and no velvet? And I want the truth, but I'm pushing people away and I'm hurting people right and left. Does my life draw people to the truth of Jesus? Or am I all velvet and no brick? Denying the truth every time I turn around. Oh, Jesus, teach us your truth. Form your truth in us. Make us into the men and women you want us to be. In your name, Jesus. Amen.